hello from Victoria and me. Welcome to this evening's programme.
First tonight, a paedophile head teacher has been jailed for 21 years for a string of sex attacks against young boys.
On Friday, a jury at Ipswich Crown Court found Derek Slade guilty of more than 50 offences against pupils who attended his boarding schools in Norfolk and Suffolk during the 1970s and 80s. Today, Judge Peter Fenn said Slade's victims lost days of childhood innocence before recommending he serve a minimum of 14 years behind bars. Well, our reporter Matthew Hudson joins us now from Ipswich Crown Court. Matt, this will be a huge relief to all the victims of Derek Slade, won't it?
Indeed. We knew Derek Slade was guilty. The question today was how long would he get for his grotesque crimes? The answer was 21 years, and as you say, he'll have to serve at least 14 of those. The reason being that his crimes went back so far that he was actually sentenced under old legislation. That means he'll have to serve 2/3 of his sentence before he can be considered for release. That'll mean he's 75 years old before he's eligible for parole, and today the police told me that at the moment they still think that he is very much a danger to children. Two of the men whose childhoods were destroyed by Derek Slade leaving court. Along with other victims, they'd cheered as he was led away to begin his 21-year sentence. He'd subjected them and many others to serious sexual assaults and beatings during the 1970s and 80s. He was convicted on Friday. Today, at last, they saw him jailed.
It is a significant sentence that's been given today, and I'm particularly pleased on behalf of the victims as much as anybody else. They have finally seen that justice has been done after a significant lapse of 28 years.
An Oxford graduate, Slade's crimes were committed while he was head of a private school based first at Wicklewood in Norfolk, then at Great Finborough in Suffolk. It has now closed and has no links to current schools in the villages. Boys aged between 5 and 12 were indecently assaulted or brutally beaten for trivial reasons, something Slade said gave him gratification. The depths of Slade's depravity are illustrated by the fact that when the police eventually raided his home, they found audio recordings he had made up to 30 years ago of himself beating young children. They also found essays he had forced them to write about what it was like to be thrashed by him, and essays he had written himself in ancient Greek to stop other people reading them. Concerns about excessive discipline at the school were investigated by Roger Cook and other journalists in the 1980s.
I believe in corporal punishment. I think it has a place in this school. I don't necessarily say it has a place in all schools.
Inspectors were sent in but raised no serious concerns. Slade was only caught when victims started to come forward. An 18-month police investigation uncovered the huge scale of the abuse. He admitted or was convicted of more than 50 offences. But why did it take so long?
I think if one looked back 30 years, institutions and adults were listened to, young people were not listened to. Although lots of people have become adults over the 30-year period, they are listened to now.
A boarding school principal and former vice chair of the Boarding Schools Association says systematic abuse like this couldn't happen today.
The culture which we all live in is very different to the way in which schools were operated in the early 80s. Corporal punishment has been outlawed for over 20 years now. And there is a much greater sense of openness in all schools, including boarding schools.
Some of Slade's victims claimed other men were also involved in the abuse. Police say the case hasn't yet been closed. Jailing Slade, the judge, Peter Fenn, said he understood the devastating impact the offences had had on the victims and said he hoped the lengthy jail sentence would help to bring them at least some closure. Matthew Hudson, Anglia News at Ipswich Crown Court.
Well, a little earlier, we spoke to the investigative journalist Roger Cook, who first uncovered the brutality of Derek Slade nearly 30 years ago.
We began by asking him how pleased he was that Slade had finally been brought to justice.
I'm extremely pleased that a very evil man has been brought to justice. He was a real Jekyll and Hyde. He managed to fool a lot of people for a long time, but of course not very pleased that it has taken as long. I mean, the programme I did that first brought him to light was in 1982. That's 28 years ago, if my maths are right.
And it is indeed correct, 28 years. Why do you feel it's taken so long to bring him to justice?
Well, even at the start, it was very difficult to get people to talk about it. Remember, the climate was different then. The children were afraid to talk about what was really happening. They would talk about being caned and beaten and thrown into cold baths and things like that, but they wouldn't talk about the sexual abuse. They'd hint at it. They were frightened that there'd be repercussions. The parents were perhaps, well, didn't know maybe, or were ashamed, and the staff, some of whom certainly knew what was going on and hinted at it at the time, wouldn't talk because they'd lose their jobs. So it was a sort of conspiracy of silence that made things go on for a long time. Then, of course, when the pressure did mount, and some of us tried to keep it up, the man got himself a forged passport and did a runner to India, where it is said he continued to do exactly the same thing.
Remind us of the type of man Slade was when you first uncovered him.
Well, I thought he was an evil man. I mean, he was utterly charming when you talked to him, but when you heard what was going on, you realised that he was putting on a front. He would happily talk about caning people and show you his diary of canings, because he kept saying discipline is good for you. It stiffens the spirit, and there should be more of it. But there was a lot more behind it.
And back to today, what lessons do you think should be learned?
Heavens, people have got to speak out. They can't hide it. And particularly if you're staff and you know what's going on, you should be shopping the man. You shouldn't be protecting your job. I know these days that's a priority, but I think the priority of children's safety should come first.
Roger Cook, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, moving on to other stories of the day, the government has given the go-ahead for the country's first free schools, and 3 of them will be here in our region.
The Education Secretary, Michael Gove, announced today that schemes in Bedford, Norwich and Suffolk could be up and running by September 2011. But what will this mean for pupils and parents? Kate Prout has this.
The first day of term at Clare Middle School in Suffolk. An air of celebration here as this school, that was going to close next July, now has a new future.
We've had around 1,500 letters of support for the whole venture, and there's a lot of aspirational parents here who really do believe that the education system has the potential to deliver a lot more than it is at the moment.
We're helping great teachers, charities, parent groups and some existing academy sponsors to start new free schools. This morning we've announced the very first batch of 16 projects that are ready to progress to the next stage of development. They're all keen to be up and running in just a year's time.
The Education Secretary, Michael Gove, outlining today the Coalition's plan for a formidable reform programme for schooling. It's thought some 700 proposals for free schools were put forward. Only 16 have so far succeeded. Many of our region's super academies open their doors for the first time today. But those free schools, hoping to be built by this time next year, will be on a much smaller scale.
A lot of the local schools around here are currently sort of 200 or 300 in a year group. We're saying we don't really want to go above 100 in a year group. We want to try and make sure the students are getting to do sport every day. And also we're going for a longer school day, so we can build in not just the sport, but all the other different kind of extracurricular opportunities. But rather than just try and squeeze them in as extras, actually make them central to what we're doing.
But the scheme hasn't won favour with everyone, including teaching's biggest union.
We're very concerned that free schools are undemocratic, they're not accountable, and they have no direct link with the local authority structure. And creating new schools will take, we believe, funding away from existing structures, and that can only be bad for existing schools in local authorities.
All 16 free schools will now have to put forward a business plan, giving teachers and parents a blank sheet to form their ideal school. Kate Prout, Anglia News, Norwich.
Now then, after years of jet-setting, it seems Hertfordshire's most famous residents have decided to move abroad permanently.
David and Victoria Beckham have had their mansion in Sawbridgeworth for 9 years. But will people living locally be sad to see them leave what's become known as Buckingham Palace? Our reporter Lorna Ramsey went to find out.
Posh and Becks. They're a favourite topic of conversation down the local. But it seems Sawbridgeworth is having to say goodbye to their most glamorous neighbours, because it's believed they're selling up and settling permanently in LA.
I don't think she's got any talent. He's got talent, but she's got none. And she can't sing, can't dance. She just goes out to spend money.
I'm quite glad, really. A little bit of get rid of her, posh, whatever. Posh. I wouldn't call her posh, would you?
I don't think actually anybody would know that they lived here, because I'm I don't think they take much part in local life, so, you know, good luck to them.
The couple have been spending a lot of their time in America since David moved to LA Galaxy 3 years ago. But of course they have houses across the globe, from France to Dubai. And this has been their home in the UK for the last 11 years. And it's not called Buckingham Palace for nothing. It's got indoor and outdoor pools, a recording studio and even a zoo. A perfect pad fit for the King and Queen of the tabloids. The Beckhams bought the house in 1999 for £2.5 million, but its value has rocketed since then. In 2003, it was worth £4.5 million. In 2007, £12.5 million. And reports today say it's worth around £18 million. And local estate agents tell me the temptation of buying the Beckhams' home is bumping up the price.
The most I've seen a property go for in this area in recent years has been up the road in Much Haddon at £14.5 million. Although, you know, it's the Beckhams' property and there could be a premium paid by somebody there.
But while there might be a mixed reaction from the local community about the Beckhams leaving, the local paper definitely doesn't want to see them go.
And they have been a good source of stories for us. It's good to have a celebrity couple, A-listers in our patch. They've generated lots of stories over the years that they've been with us. Some quirky ones, some more hard news stories and some good local angles for us.
So the Beckhams may be leaving Hertfordshire for good, but it seems their legacy will continue to live on here. Lorna Ramsey, Anglia News, Sawbridgeworth.
Posh fish and chips, I love it. Hasn't your house got a zoo?
Oh yeah, I've got a